I sat across from the attorney and watched the way his fingers trembled when he pushed the thick folder toward me, a small motion that somehow made the room tilt. The polished wood beneath my hands felt colder than it should have been, like the whole office knew something I didn't. He told me to turn to page 3, and the air between us felt heavy, expectant, almost apologetic. When I opened the folder, the words on the document swam for a second, refusing to make sense, refusing to belong to the life I thought I still had. My house, the one I had built a life inside, the one where my partner had laughed, cooked, argued, loved, and died, was no longer mine. The title had been transferred 6 months earlier. The name on the new deed was the same person I had once held on my shoulders while they giggled at the 4th of July parade. The attorney kept talking, quiet and careful, but his voice sounded like someone reading an obituary aloud. Power of attorney, transfer forms, bank accounts. I tried to breathe. My hand, the same one that had steadied rifles overseas and held onto my partner's hand when the last days of cancer came, shook when I flipped to the next page. The numbers there hit harder than any explosion I had ever felt. $18,000. That was all that remained. 3 weeks before, the balance had been more than $4 million. Years of service pay, pension, insurance, savings, the lifetime I had built with someone who was now gone, all reduced to a balance that barely covered a few months of bills. I heard myself whisper something like there must be some mistake, but deep inside, something already knew. The attorney said I had 30 days to leave the property. Leave my home, the place I still talked to my partner as if they were in the next room. When the attorney left, I stayed sitting there with the folder open in front of me, my hands flat against the glossy paper like I could press the truth back into something gentler. The blinds cut bars of light across the documents, bright enough to hurt my eyes. I stared at them anyway. It felt like staring at a crime scene where I was the victim and the evidence was printed neatly in black ink. I thought about the months after my partner died, how the mornings felt too wide and too silent, how I had poured coffee into 2 mugs for 3 weeks before I could accept there would never be a second set of footsteps in the kitchen again, how grief had made me slow, made me forget small things, made my hands shake when I tried to sort old medical bills. I remembered how the person I trusted most began stepping in, offering help in a voice so soft it felt like comfort. They had told me that they were just organizing things for me, that they were taking stress off my shoulders, that they were proud to be there for me, that I didn't have to worry because they would take care of everything. They used that exact phrase, take care of everything. I didn't know then that the taking began long before the caring ended. After my partner's death, the house had felt huge, empty, echoing. The person who took everything from me had begun filling that silence, bringing dinner, sitting at the table with me, asking questions that sounded loving but were really reconnaissance. Where is the paperwork for the cabin? Do you know the passwords to these accounts? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Would you like help managing things? I had mistaken that concern for compassion. I had mistaken manipulation for love. I had mistaken a predator for a lifeline. When my granddaughter visited weeks later, she asked if I was all right. She said I looked tired, distracted, faded. I laughed and told her I was managing, but her eyes held something sharper than worry, something like suspicion. She was the one who told me I was forgetting I stayed in the house that night, though calling it my house felt like a lie that scraped inside my chest. Every room looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore, as if someone had come in while I wasn't looking and rearranged the air. My granddaughter refused to leave, pacing the living room with her arms wrapped tight around herself like she was trying to hold her worry in place. She kept glancing at me, then at the empty doorway, then back at me, as if waiting for the truth to break through the walls on its own. When she finally sat down beside me, her voice trembled the way paper trembles before it tears. She told me what she had seen on her father's desk. My address printed in bold on transfer papers, my signature forged with a precision that made my stomach turn. She said she didn't want to believe it, but the unease had been curling around her for months. How they skipped family dinners, how they avoided my calls, how her mother's smile had begun to look stretched tight, like it was glued on. She cried when she admitted she had searched through his laptop. I didn't scold her. I think a part of me had been waiting for someone else to see what I had been too loyal to acknowledge. She showed me the screen, the accounts, the gambling sites, the ones with flashing colors and spinning animations designed to sink hooks into weakness, the losses staggered, relentless, A disappearing act performed with money that wasn't his to lose. My money, my partner's money. Decades of work. Gone into digital machines that fed on desperation. My granddaughter whispered that her father had fallen apart after his surgery 2 years ago, when the pain pills created a hunger he couldn't outrun. When he traded one addiction for another because he couldn't bear the shame of the first. She said her mother had tried to patch the holes, shifting numbers, moving funds, forging stability where there was none. But eventually the dam of lies burst. They were drowning, and instead of reaching for help, they had reached for me. I listened, each word sinking like lead. I wanted to deny it. Tell her she misunderstood. Tell her her father was good, responsible, steady. But the truth had already taken shape inside me before she finished speaking. The bank confirmed what we feared the next morning. The clerk's expression twisted with something between pity and dread as he showed me the screen. My accounts emptied with methodical precision. Every withdrawal initiated under the authority I had handed over with the trust of a father who believed his child would never turn the knife inward. Transfer after transfer, each one a quiet theft dressed in legal clothing. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred and the clerk's voice turned into something distant and useless. My granddaughter squeezed my hand and whispered that we would fix it. I didn't have the heart to tell her I didn't know if we could. The property records office was worse. Seeing the cabin listed under a new name felt like someone reaching into my memories and pulling out the heart of them. That cabin was where my partner and I spent summers fixing the same broken screen door and arguing about whether the dock needed to be replaced. That dock had held more laughter than most people experience in a lifetime. Now it belonged to a man who looked me in the eye every holiday and said he loved me. I couldn't remember the drive home, only the moment when I stood in the living room and felt the shape of the betrayal pressing against my ribs like a bruise forming from the inside. My granddaughter asked what we should do, so small and raw that I wanted to protect her from this ugliness, but the truth was, she had protected me first. We talked late into the night. She told me she wasn't going back to her parents' house. She said their silence around her had felt poisonous for months, that the lies in the air there felt thicker than the truth anywhere else. She said she wouldn't leave me alone while I was being pushed toward a life that wasn't mine. Her loyalty hit me harder than the betrayal. I told her she didn't have to choose sides. She said she already had. The next morning, the call came from the one who had taken everything. His voice was smooth, practiced, like someone reading lines from a script written to excuse himself. He claimed he had only been protecting me, that I was aging, slipping, needing guidance, that the transition of assets was necessary. He made it sound so reasonable that for half a second I felt the old reflex of believing him tug at my chest. Then I remembered what I had seen, what my granddaughter had seen. I told him he had taken everything. He said I still had my pension, that I could rent a nice apartment, as if that were consolation, as if the theft of a lifetime could be softened with a suggestion of downgraded comfort. I said his name like a question, a plea, a wound. He hung up. The silence afterward felt like a chasm I might fall into if I breathed too hard. My granddaughter touched my shoulder. Her eyes were red but steady. She said we needed help. She said there were lawyers who specialized in this. She said we were going to fight. I didn't know then just how far this fight would reach, how deep the rot went, how many lies were layered above the truth. All I knew was that the person I raised had chosen greed over blood, and the person he raised had chosen courage over silence. In that moment, I felt something rise inside me again, not anger, not grief, but the same instinct that kept me alive through years of war. A vow whispered so quietly, it felt like breath. I will not let them bury me. The attorney's office felt smaller than the first time I walked through its doors, as if the walls had moved closer overnight, pressing me toward decisions I wasn't ready to make. The woman handling my case sat across from me with her fingers steepled, her eyes sharp in a way that made me straighten despite the weight in my chest. She spoke plainly about the laws I didn't understand and the hurdles I hadn't imagined, laying out each obstacle with the calm certainty of someone who had walked into storms like this before. She said the power I had handed over months ago was a double lock on my own cage, and that undoing it would take more than outrage or hurt feelings. It would take proof, relentless and precise, the kind that cuts through lies like glass edges. My granddaughter sat beside me, shoulders squared, taking notes with determination that looked too heavy for someone her age. When the attorney finished explaining, the silence sat between us like a confession. She said we had a chance, but it would be long and ugly, and the people who betrayed me had likely prepared for this eventuality long before I understood what was happening. She also said something that lodged deep inside my ribs. She believed me, not because the papers were convincing, not because the bank records were damning, but because there was a clarity in the way I spoke, a cohesion in my memory that no person slipping into confusion could fake. She said she had seen enough true decline to recognize when a man still stood on solid mental ground. After the meeting, my granddaughter and I walked out into the cold. The air tasted metallic, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. She wrapped her arm through mine and asked if I was ready. I didn't know if ready was possible anymore, but I nodded. The fight had already started the moment I realized I had been stripped of everything. We spent the next week sorting through documents, printing statements, gathering anything that could help tell the story of what had been stolen and how. My granddaughter kept finding things that made her jaw clench: photographs of repairs I had paid for, receipts proving the house had always been mine, letters from her grandmother tucked in drawers we almost forgot to check. Each discovery felt like peeling away another layer of denial, exposing the truth more starkly than the last. But every time hope flickered, a new blow arrived to smother it. A letter came from a court saying I was restricted from contacting the ones who had taken everything. My own son had filed it, claiming he was afraid of me. The shock of that accusation cracked something inside me. I had never raised a hand to him, not once. The attorney said it was a tactic meant to frame me as unstable, a way to silence me before I could speak. My granddaughter nearly tore the letter in half before I stopped her. She said her father had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I told her anger would burn us alive if we let it. She said maybe that was what needed to happen for people like him to finally see the fire they lit. Each day the attorney filed something new: requests for records, motions to freeze accounts, demands for documents the other side tried desperately to hide. My granddaughter spent entire afternoons at the law office, sifting through pages, highlighting patterns, building timelines. She was relentless. I didn't know if she had inherited that from me or if betrayal had carved it into her, sharpening her into someone who fought without hesitation. But every night when she got home, I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the cost of choosing truth over family. I thanked her one evening. She shook her head and said she wasn't doing this for gratitude, but because silence would make her complicit. She said some things were worth losing people for. The night before the first hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark of the small apartment, staring at a brick wall through the window, remembering the house I used to look out from, the deck, the trees shifting in the wind, the life that once felt stable, permanent, solid. I remembered the way my partner would leave a porch light on for me when I worked late or traveled, a small circle of warmth waiting at the end of every road. Now the light was gone, and the person who took it was someone I had once lifted onto my shoulders, someone I taught to drive, someone I protected through scraped knees and heartbreaks. I didn't know how to reconcile the father I had been with the man who now stood accused in filings. Betrayal rewrites memory in cruel ways. The next morning, the courthouse smelled like old paper and floor polish, like every government building I had ever stepped into during my career. The room was full of people who had nothing to do with my life but would decide parts of it anyway. My granddaughter squeezed my hand before the attorney guided us to our seats. When the ones who had taken everything walked in, my breath hitched. They looked polished, composed, unscarred by the destruction they left behind. I barely recognized them. They spoke with confidence when the judge asked questions, weaving a narrative where I was fragile, forgetful, confused. They spoke of concern and necessity, painting themselves as caretakers instead of thieves. Listening to it felt like standing outside my own life, watching strangers rewrite my story. But when the attorney stood, the room shifted. Her voice cut through the lies with calm precision, laying out every withdrawal, every transfer, every forged signature. She presented patterns that were too calculated to be accidents. She spoke of addiction hidden beneath respectability, of debts disguised as duties, of a man stripped of everything under the guise of protection. She called me a victim of manipulation, not incompetence. She called their actions exploitation, not care. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Truth doesn't shout. When we left the courthouse, the cold hit harder than before. My granddaughter asked how I felt. I didn't answer right away. I looked at the sky instead, gray and low, as if even the weather was bracing for what came next. Finally, I told her the truth. I felt like a man standing at the edge of a long road, one he never asked to walk, but one he would walk anyway, because turning back was no longer an option, and because someone had to. Things, not my financial records, not my paperwork, but the truth that I had put my full trust into someone who was quietly uprooting me from everything I had left, and I had invited them in, signed what they asked me to sign, believed every word that was spoken gently enough to hide the blade under it. Now, sitting in that attorney's office, realizing my son had stripped my life bare, something dark and shaking began to coil inside me. Not rage, something colder, something that came from the battlefield, parts of me I thought I had buried years ago. Survival. The part of me that understood betrayal in the most absolute sense. The part of me that had watched fellow soldiers fall because someone they trusted made one wrong decision. I gathered the papers, folded them carefully, even though the edges felt sharp enough to cut me, walked out of the office into air that felt wrong, too bright for the kind of darkness settling into my bones. I stood outside with the folder pressed to my chest and felt the strange hollow of being a man who had survived war, survived loss, survived watching my partner fade away, only to be undone by my own blood. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted. A promise. If they wanted a fight, they would get one, and I would not lose. The weeks leading up to the next hearing dragged like an anchor across an already wounded life, each day stretching thin under the weight of paperwork and the low simmer of dread that never truly left my chest. My granddaughter kept moving through it with a focus that unsettled me, always bent over files, always reading, always highlighting, as if the truth itself might slip through her fingers if she let her guard drop for even a second. I noticed the way she rubbed at her temples when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her hands trembled faintly after long hours comparing signatures and cross-checking dates. I wanted to tell her to stop, to rest, to walk away from the mess someone else created, but she wouldn't. There was something in her eyes I recognized from moments in my own past, the moments when defeat felt inevitable, but pride wouldn't allow surrender. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing it because she refused to let a lie bury a man who had spent his whole life trying to do the right thing. Our attorney called nearly every day with updates. Sometimes the news was sharp enough to puncture whatever hope I'd managed to gather. Sometimes it gave us a thread of possibility strong enough to pull us forward. One afternoon, she said the forensic accountant had located another hidden account, one tied directly to personal debts held by the people who betrayed me. My granddaughter didn't celebrate. She just set her jaw and went back to organizing the files, as if every new piece of information was another stone added to the load she carried. The apartment felt smaller with every passing week, as though the walls had absorbed the tension and were now pressing it back at us. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, staring at the faint glow of city lights leaking through the blinds, remembering the house I used to live in, the one that no longer legally belonged to me. I remembered the way my partner would set a cup of tea next to me on winter nights, the way she hummed under her breath while cleaning up after dinner. Small, fragile sounds that anchored me in ways I didn't understand until they were gone. The silence of the apartment held no such warmth. My granddaughter often slept on the couch, her laptop open, notes scattered like fallen leaves. She insisted it was comfortable, but I saw her wince in the mornings, stretching a stiff neck, brushing off the discomfort with a smile she thought would reassure me. One night, I woke to faint sobbing. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't mine. She sat hunched over her knees, hiding her face, shoulders shaking. I walked over and rested a hand on her back. She froze, then exhaled a shuddering breath. "I'm fine," she whispered. But I knew fine was what people said when they had run out of words for what hurt. She said she missed the life we had before, the family dinners, the easy conversations, the belief that blood meant something more than obligation. She said she felt stupid for still loving the people who burned everything down. I told her love wasn't the crime here, betrayal was. And betrayal belonged to them, not to her. The next morning she woke up with red eyes but a sharper determination. She said something had shifted overnight, that she was done trying to understand why people hurt the ones who raised them. She said sometimes there is no why, only the wreckage left behind. When the day of the hearing arrived, we walked into the courthouse like two people bracing against a storm neither of us could see, but both of us could feel. The hall smelled like old coffee and worn carpet, and the buzz of voices echoed in the narrow space. The people who took everything arrived late, walking in with the practiced confidence of those who believe consequences are for other people. They barely glanced at me. I watched their expressions, looking for remorse or guilt or even hesitation. I found nothing except annoyance, as if this entire ordeal was an inconvenience someone else had created. Their attorney spoke with ease, weaving a narrative so polished it almost sounded plausible, a story where I was slipping, where they had stepped in, out of necessity, where the financial decisions they made were guided by responsibility rather than desperation. Listening to it was like hearing my own life distorted through cracked glass. Then our attorney stood. Her presence shifted the entire room. She didn't argue. She unveiled. She walked through every document, every signature, every unexplained withdrawal. She spoke of secrecy, of deception, of patterns that could not be accidental. She explained how addiction had carved tunnels through judgment until morality had become a distant landmark. She showed the judge what the bank statements revealed, a bleeding of funds disguised as duty, masked as care. She held nothing back, and with each piece of evidence, I watched the people who betrayed me shrink, their confidence evaporating under the weight of exposed truth. My granddaughter sat still, her eyes locked on the judge, her breath held tight in her chest, as though releasing it would break the fragile moment we were fighting for. When it was over, the judge didn't announce a decision. She said she needed time, time to review, time to consider, time to sift through the mess that had become my life. We walked out of the courthouse, neither victorious nor defeated, just suspended. My granddaughter squeezed my arm the way she used to when she was a child crossing busy streets, except now she was the one guiding me. She asked if I was okay. I didn't know how to answer. I felt hollow and heavy at once, as if someone had scooped out the inside of me and filled it with lead. I told her the truth. I am tired. She nodded, not with pity but with understanding. We stood on the courthouse steps while cold wind swept through the city, and she leaned her head against my shoulder. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we face it together." It wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. But in that moment, it was enough. I didn't expect the call. It came early, the kind of early where the city outside still hadn't shaken off the night, where the air felt colder than it should inside a place meant to shelter you. The attorney's voice on the line was tight, quieter than usual, as if she was trying to steady herself before delivering whatever news she carried. She said the investigation had split open something bigger than we anticipated, something darker woven into the financial wreckage left behind. She said the forensic accountant had traced debts not just to gambling, but to people who didn't tolerate delays, excuses, or losses. People who would squeeze every owed dollar from whoever stood closest. People who didn't care about law or conscience or blood. Hearing it made something inside me twist. Not fear exactly, but a sinking recognition that the collapse of my life wasn't just carelessness or weakness. It was desperation. The attorney said we needed to move quickly, that the court might accelerate parts of the case because the situation had crossed into danger rather than just fraud. My granddaughter heard the tone in my voice and came to stand beside me, her hand gripping my arm like she could feel the tremor beneath the skin. When I hung up, she asked what happened. I told her, or tried to. But some truths feel like broken metal in your mouth, heavy and sharp, cutting as they're spoken. She didn't flinch. She just nodded slowly, like she had already considered this possibility in some quiet corner of her mind. She said it explained the frantic transfers, the reckless choices, the rapid unraveling. She said addiction alone doesn't hollow someone out that fast unless something else is feeding the fire. The days that followed blurred together. The attorney filed motions faster than I could read them. The investigator uncovered more details, each one worse than the last. My granddaughter sat through every meeting, every late-night call, every document review. She said she couldn't look away anymore. She said once you see the truth of someone's actions, pretending otherwise is another form of betrayal. Then came the hearing. The courtroom was packed. My breath felt thin from the moment I stepped inside. The people who had taken everything looked smaller than before, as if the weight of their own lies had begun pressing downward, grinding them into something brittle. They avoided my eyes. They avoided my granddaughter's eyes too. Their attorney tried to paint the same story again, the one I now knew by heart, the one that cast them as protectors instead of thieves. But the evidence fought harder this time. The investigator presented traced payments, timelines, messages that left no room for misinterpretation. The judge's questions were harder than before, sharper, the kind that cut excuses down to bone. She asked why financial decisions were made in secret, why documents were signed without explanation, why assets were transferred into names that offered no transparency. The answers came thin, shaky, unraveling with every passing minute. My granddaughter watched them the whole time, her face unreadable, but I could feel the tension rolling off her like waves crashing against a shore. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger is too clean. She was disappointed in a way that could break a person if they looked directly at it. When the hearing ended, the judge didn't walk out immediately. She stared at the people who betrayed me for a long moment, then said she would issue a ruling soon and that it would be based solely on evidence, not on the stories people told themselves to sleep at night. We left without speaking to anyone. Outside, the sky was heavy, swollen with rain it refused to release. My granddaughter asked if I wanted to sit somewhere, maybe get coffee, maybe breathe air that didn't feel tainted by everything we had just heard. I said no. I didn't trust myself to sit. I felt like if I stopped moving, the weight of everything would pin me in place. That night, the attorney called again. She said the court was granting emergency protection over what was left of my finances. She said further transfers were frozen. She said the investigation was moving toward criminal charges. And she said something else, softer, almost hesitant. She said she could see how much this was hurting my granddaughter, even more than me. Betrayal in youth hits differently, she said. It cracks the foundation before it fully sets. After the call ended, I found my granddaughter standing by the window, staring at the distant lights, like she was counting them. I told her she didn't have to go through this. She didn't owe me this fight. She didn't owe me anything. She turned to me, her voice low, brittle, steady in a way that sounded older than she was. She said if she walked away, she'd be teaching herself that love can vanish the moment it becomes inconvenient. She said, loyalty shouldn't be something predators get to weaponize. She said the people who hurt us needed to face something they couldn't lie their way out of. The next morning, something shifted. Maybe the air, maybe me, maybe her, but I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since before everything was taken. I realized that surviving wasn't the end goal. Reclaiming what was stolen wasn't the end goal either. The real fight was dignity, selfhood, the right to stand as the person I had been all my life, not the confused shadow they tried to paint me as, the right to say no, the right to resist, the right to exist without apology. And somewhere in that realization was a spark of something old but not forgotten, something like the defiance that once kept me alive in places far more dangerous than courtrooms. My granddaughter saw it before I said a word. She smiled, small and tired but real. She said, "Good. Because the next round," she said, "will be worse. But now, we're ready." The ruling came on a morning so still it felt staged, as if the city had paused just long enough for one life to be rearranged again. My phone buzzed once, a single vibration that felt heavier than its size should allow. My granddaughter was already awake, standing by the counter with a mug she wasn't drinking from, eyes fixed on me as though she could read the verdict in the way I inhaled. The attorney's voice on the line was steady, controlled to the point of sounding rehearsed. She said the judge had reached a decision, that the documents stripped me of my life had been declared invalid, that the transfers were void, that the court acknowledged the pattern of exploitation so clearly it no longer needed explanation. She went on to say criminal charges were moving forward, that the walls were closing in on those who had built their safety on my silence. I didn't speak for several seconds because something in my chest loosened and tightened at the same time. I wasn't free, not yet, not completely, but the ground under me no longer shook. After I hung up, my granddaughter crossed the room slowly, as if she were afraid that any sudden movement would shatter the moment. Her hands trembled when she touched my face. She whispered, "We did it," though the words sounded more like a question than a declaration. I pulled her close. She didn't cry this time. She just exhaled with the weight of someone who had carried more than she should have had to. The next hours felt unreal. The attorney met us at the courthouse to walk us through the next steps. Her expression carried satisfaction but also caution. She said victory was never clean in cases like this, that consequences had ripples, that fallout could crush people in unexpected ways. She said the people who hurt me were facing charges that would stain the rest of their lives, and she asked softly if I was prepared for that truth. I lied when I said yes. I told her justice mattered more than history, more than nostalgia, more than blood. But a part of me still remembered the years before the collapse, before addiction gnawed through the walls of my family. Memory is a cruel archivist. It doesn't erase the tenderness just because pain arrived later. My granddaughter squeezed my hand under the table, anchoring me to the version of reality where truth mattered more than sentiment. The attorney slid new papers toward me, documents restoring control, documents undoing the damage, documents putting my life back into my own hands. My signature felt different this time, not proud, not triumphant, but deliberate, steady in a way grief can't touch. After the courthouse, my granddaughter asked if we could drive past the house that had once been mine, the one I had stopped letting myself think about because grief over wood and walls felt too foolish for a grown man. But she insisted. She said closure looks different for everyone. The street felt smaller than I remembered. The house looked both familiar and foreign, like an old photograph left too long under harsh light. The yard was uncut. The curtains were drawn. It looked abandoned in the way things often look when people try to turn homes into assets instead of memories. My granddaughter watched my face carefully. I kept my expression still, but something inside me cracked open at the sight, the quiet reminder that a place can be reclaimed legally without ever being restored emotionally. She asked if I wanted to go inside. I said no. Not yet, maybe not ever. I told her the house had become a wound before it became a possession again, and wounds need time before they can be touched. We drove home in silence. Good silence this time, not the heavy, suffocating kind, the kind that made space for breath. Weeks passed. The attorneys on the other side scrambled, filing desperate motions with no spine left in them. The investigator continued uncovering trails that tightened the noose around the people who had taken everything. My granddaughter started sleeping more, eating better. She laughed, sometimes small, brief sounds, but real. I found myself listening for them. The day criminal charges were officially filed. We were sitting at my small dining table eating takeout. When the notification flashed across her phone, she looked at me with something like relief mixed with sorrow. She said accountability doesn't erase love, but it does clear the fog enough to see what love isn't. I told her she was wiser than her years. She said she didn't want to be. As months rolled forward, life didn't return to what it had been. It couldn't. Too much had been broken, too much revealed, too much reshaped by betrayal. But something new formed in the empty spaces. My granddaughter enrolled in a different program, one focused on helping people who experienced what I had endured. She said the system needed more fighters. She said she wanted to be one. I supported her because giving up wasn't an option for either of us anymore. People sometimes ask what I feel now. Triumph, anger, closure, satisfaction. None of those are right. What I feel is quieter, deeper, a strange mix of sorrow and strength, the understanding that survival doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes survival is simply choosing to stand again. Sometimes survival is letting go of the version of the past you wish were still true. Sometimes survival is allowing yourself to breathe without apology. On the evening, the final paperwork arrived, restoring everything legally. I sat alone in the dim light of the apartment that had held my grief, my fear, my fury, and my slow rebuilding. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I just placed the documents on the table and rested my hands on them, feeling the weight of everything I had lost and everything I had clawed back. My granddaughter came in quietly and sat beside me. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Sometimes presence itself is the closure we don't know we needed. I told her one day we might go back to the house, walk through it room by room, decide what future it deserves. She nodded. But tonight, she said, we rest. And we did. In the quiet, after all the breaking and all the fighting, we finally allowed ourselves to exist in a moment that didn't hurt. Not victory, not revenge, not forgiveness, just breath, just peace. Just the fragile beginning of a life no longer defined by what was taken, but by what we chose to rebuild.